delivery here in the province, this is an aspect, or this is an area that they don't need to go down when we're talking around midwives. The Minister of Health says fear-mongering. Well, I'm not fear-mongering, Mr. Speaker. The Minister could stop this right now. I would sit down and let him say that he will cover this, Mr. Speaker. The Minister can stop the insecurities that many Nova Scotians have by opening up and telling us what this government's going to do to support and promote the public health care system in this province. But this minister refuses to do that. I think he continues to go down that road that Nova Scotians don't want to go down and Canadians don't want to go down, and that's public or private delivery of health care in this province and in this country, Mr. Speaker. And I've said it before, I'll say it again, that myself, my caucus members will stand up and fight any changes that tears apart or hurts the public system. That's what Nova Scotians expect us to do, and I hope the government realizes that's what Nova Scotians want them to do, is to support and create better opportunities to improve the public health care system, Mr. Speaker, in this province. So I hope the minister will state soon that with this profession and through the next process around the creation of regulations that will deem what the scope of practice and what midwives can do in this province and the important roles they're going to play, that they recognize that it has to be under the public system. And we don't want to go down the road of that private delivery system, Mr. Speaker, especially around midwives. That's not what they wanted. That's not what their intentions are. And that if we don't get that commitment from government that the profession of midwives and midwifery will fail in this province if they're not covered under the public system, Mr. Speaker, it'll fail. They've said it themselves. They know how important it is, and we just look across the country. We don't have to, he doesn't have to take my word for it, Mr. Speaker. Go to the other provinces, ask the ministers of health there how important and how important the roles of midwives and midwifery are in those provinces when it comes to health care delivery. And we've heard it yesterday around Alberta and their decision not to cover it, and it's hurt that profession, Mr. Speaker, and now they're taking the steps to change that, and I hope they do that quickly. So I hope the minister will be open and forthcoming with his ideas and his support of the public system, something that we haven't heard much from the minister over the last little while around supporting the system. So I welcome the minister's comments on this, and I hope he stands up and does the right thing. I hope you do the right thing, Mr. Minister, around this profession. I hope you do the right thing and support this profession, and I hope he realizes the importance of doing that. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I'm glad to see this finally come to the floor of this legislation after many years, Mr. Speaker, and I look forward and will be watching with great intent on the creation and the steps that will come after this in hopefully to improve and support this profession, Mr. Speaker, in the healthcare system in Nova Scotia. So thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Glace Bay.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Always a pleasure to follow the member for Sackville-Cobequid. He's an eloquent speaker, Mr. Speaker, and I enjoy listening to him on many occasions. As I've said many times before in this chamber, there's just something about that guy I like. I don't know quite what it is. Mr. Speaker, it's almost ironic. It's almost ironic that the first three speakers in this legislature on this bill dealing with midwifery would be men. I look forward, first of all, to hearing from our female colleagues later on in the debate, which I'm sure we will, Mr. Speaker, to get the other side of the story, so to speak, Mr. Speaker. But speaking just on the bill itself, this first of all has to be a lesson to all of us, a lesson that we've learned from the stakeholders involved in this story, a lesson of perseverance. Because as a member for Sackville-Cobequid alluded to, this has gone on for a decade at least, if not more. I have to mention a former colleague of mine, Dr. Jim Smith, who was a previous health minister in this legislature for the Liberal government at the time, who was a strong advocate of midwifery, Mr. Speaker, but never had the chance, unfortunately, to bring it through. It is an idea whose time has come. There's no question about it. But there's a very important component that's missing, Mr. Speaker, and that is the component, and the minister is quite well aware of this, the component of funding. If we are to proceed in any way, shape, or form and make this a success in this province, that component of funding has to be and is an essential part of this health care team. It has to be there, Mr. Speaker. It's something that has to be dealt with. I listened with great interest to a midwife representative outside of the chamber the other day doing an interview when asked what they charge for their services and so on. And they do have somewhat of what she referred to as a sliding scale, depending, I would suppose, on your income. And it went, I'm not going to give the figures because I can't recall off the top of my head, but it's appeared to me anyway at the time, Mr. Speaker, that some of the people that certainly could most use this service in this province may well not be afford to pay for it right now. And that's part of the problem without that funding. If you can't pay for it, you can't use the service. Many of those people, Mr. Speaker, would come from rural areas of Nova Scotia, again, as my colleague from Sackville-Cobequid has alluded to. There are concerns, some other concerns that we have with this legislation, Mr. Speaker, and they certainly evolve around whether or not, whether or not we're in favor of self-regulating legislation. There's absolutely no question about that. We don't like the idea of leaving all of the decisions to council or to regulations made by cabinet and so on. There are concerns about that. We are encouraged by the government's acknowledging that self-governing legislation for professional bodies, as we have been in many other instances that we've seen, Mr. Speaker, but the legislature itself has the duty, has the responsibility to ensure the protection of the citizens of Nova Scotia. We cannot, nor should we, in our opinion, Mr. Speaker, leave everything to be decided by cabinet or council to regulate or determine regulations. We think that is a very slippery slope to start going down, Mr. Speaker, and we want to bring that to everyone's attention. Mr. Speaker, it's as I said. It is a lesson for all of us that the fact that this has taken that long, that the lesson that is to be learned here is that I guess, government can pay attention. We, can pay attention to the people that are talking to them. I congratulate the minister on taking that first step forward. I also remind the minister at the same time that it's a very small step forward, Mr. Minister, and that, again, without, small steps sometimes can become big steps if you make sure that you have the right footwear. This time, the footwear would include you have to have the funding. It has to be there in order that midwives are indeed recognized as an important component, as they should be, of our healthcare teams in this province, Mr. Speaker. And with those short remarks, Mr. Speaker, brief remarks, I will take my seat. Thank you.
The honourable member for Halifax Needham.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I am absolutely delighted to have an opportunity to stand in my place here today and speak in support of this bill, Bill 107, an act respecting midwifery. And I want to start by offering a very sincere congratulations to the Minister of Health with respect to bringing this bill forward. In all sincerity, Mr. Speaker, I think this is quite a significant piece of legislation, and this is an occasion that we should celebrate, that actually there is some movement on an issue that for far too long was neglected. And I also want to congratulate the Midwifery Coalition of Nova Scotia for their persistence and their patience. Because, Mr. Speaker, I don't know if I was in their shoes, if I would have persisted as long and with such incredible patience as they demonstrated. Mr. Speaker, I think it's important to start by saying that people need to recognize that we actually have in the province of Nova Scotia, prior to this legislation, a number of very capable and well-trained midwives who were very limited in what it was that they were able to offer to prospective parents in the province of Nova Scotia, that quite often their involvement ended at the doors of the hospital. And really what this does, Mr. Speaker, is it opens up the access of midwives to follow people who they have been supporting throughout a pregnancy, through the actual birthing process, and then back into the postnatal process. And Mr. Speaker, this is very, very important because it really does accept, I think, for the first time and entrench the intentions of the province of Nova Scotia to recognize a realistic scope of practice for midwifery in the province. And this, as I said, is a day that's long overdue. Mr. Speaker, it's rather incredible in a way that we're here at this stage, you know, giving recognition for probably one of the oldest professions in many respects in our history, in the history of civilization. The practice of midwifery, Mr. Speaker, is a very old practice. And Mr. Speaker, in other parts of the Western world, midwifery is very much an accepted part of a continuum of care in the process of pregnancy and birth. Today, Mr. Speaker, we have the, I think, added challenge of seeing a dramatic reduction in the number of physicians, family physicians in particular, who are prepared to deliver babies. And more and more, it's the case that women around this province are in situations where they find it very, very difficult to find a qualified person to follow them from the point of conception through delivery and postnatal care. And Mr. Speaker, we all know that these are absolutely critical periods for children, for the development of children. One of the leading indicators of the determinants of health and health risk is healthy birth rates, Mr. Speaker, and really being able to work with and provide support to a first-time parent or a parent who is going through perhaps difficulties around pregnancy, to have that kind of supportive person who is able to have access to diagnostic services and various other things that can be provided to ensure that pregnancy is healthy and that ultimately the birth experience is a healthy experience and one where risks are minimized and the outcomes are positive for mother and child. Mr. Speaker, this is so important, and this is what midwives do. Mr. Speaker, there is a vast literature on the significant changes that have occurred with respect to childbirth, particularly in countries like ours and Western societies. If you look at the statistics, the numbers of intrusive interventions in what for most pregnancies should be low risk, natural processes are really quite significant. The use of forceps in birth, the number of cesarean sections has grown quite significantly. And Mr. Speaker, I'm not too happy to say that when you look at the Atlantic provinces, provinces, and I think New Brunswick probably has one of the worst records in the country. The Advisory Council on the Status of Women have undertaken a program of really monitoring what has occurred with respect to the healthy births in the province of New Brunswick. And you know, Nova Scotia doesn't fare a heck of a lot better. We are somewhat in a better position, but not so much that we can walk around with our chests stuck out saying, you know, what great people we are. We really do have, I think, to monitor the use of very intrusive procedures in the birthing process. And it sometimes causes me and many other people serious concern to see the impact that the Hollywood set, the jet set, have on all kinds of cultural practices, really, throughout our society. And there is a growing tendency to have cesarean sections as a very quick way and a perceived way to avoid the pain of natural childbirths. But Mr. Speaker, cesareans bring with them their own difficulties, and this is not something that I think we should be accepting uncritically. There needs to be, I think, some more reflection on what the implications are of these greatly intrusive processes into the birthing process that reflect a high use of technology, a high use of intervention, and actually surgical requirements and surgical procedures that wouldn't necessarily be required at all in the course of a natural birth, one that is not high risk. So, Mr. Speaker, it is the profession of midwives, I believe, that bring the expertise and also bring that kind of critical reflection and perspective on how childbirth, particularly a childbirth that is not a high-risk childbirth, can proceed in a very both cost-effective and a natural kind of way. So, Mr. Speaker, my colleague, both in this caucus and in the Liberal caucus, have spoke to their concerns around the lack of commitment from the government and from the minister with respect to how midwifery services will be funded as they're integrated into the healthcare system. And I too share this concern, Mr. Speaker, that the minister is unable to commit to covering through our public healthcare system the cost of midwifery services is, I think, a very serious problem and omission in terms of where we're going. And I look forward to hearing the minister say that, in fact, these services will be covered in the public system. And I want to lay out why I think it is important that these services be covered in the public system. Number one, midwife services actually will be a bargain. They will be a bargain in terms of having experienced, capable people proceed with a pregnant mother throughout that process, healthier babies, healthier mothers, less intrusive, which means less costly procedures, being able to have people spend less days in maternity wards, less readmissions to hospital or into an emergency room or even into physicians' offices. This is the tangible impact of having the appropriate people provide the appropriate services at the appropriate time throughout the birthing process, Mr. Speaker. In addition to this, Mr. Speaker, we need to have a system that provides people who want midwifery services the access to that system, including people who aren't high income, don't have the disposable income available to purchase privately these services. There should be no difference between a mom who has a low income than a middle income or a higher income person. And this is a fundamental piece of the principles of our healthcare system. But in addition to that, Mr. Speaker, to be able to maintain your license as a midwife and to be able to maintain your skills will require that those people are able to do at least some minimum amount of work on a regular basis. And if, in fact, we privatize this part of the service, then I think we could very much see a jeopardizing of the opportunities that will be required for people to be able to practice and maintain their license. And so if we set up that kind of a private pay fee-for-service regime, we could undermine this whole, I think, system that is the right way to go. And we all share that belief that this is the right way to go. But getting there, how we get there is fundamental. And I believe the only way that we can ensure a high quality midwifery program in the province of Nova Scotia is to ensure that it's publicly funded and is very much a feature of our public health care system. So, Mr. Speaker, these are things that are all very important when you take into consideration where we're going. You know, training and education is also a piece of what we will be looking at. The criteria for entry into the active practice of midwifery and to get a license is yet to be defined. It will be defined in the regulations. In the province of Nova Scotia right now, we have no training institutions that offer the training for midwives. There is a program that I'm aware of at Ryerson University. One of our former members of this legislature, Yvonne Atwell's daughter, is currently training in that program. I think this is her last year. And I've spoken with her on several occasions, Rhonda, and she tells me it's a phenomenal program. She is somebody who would very much like to come back to the province of Nova Scotia to be able to practice. And I've heard from many Nova Scotians, as a matter of fact, Nova Scotian women. I had one of my former social work students who may actually be from or close to the minister's riding, has gone to the United States and taken training as a midwife. And I know that various people who had midwifery training, they're also very concerned about how it is that they're going to be able to be mentored, supervised. You don't just go and take a program and then show up the next day and hang your shingle out and start to practice. There often is a process of having to do so many hours of work and follow a number of people through pregnancy, delivery, and what have you. And this is all done under the supervision of people who have the skills and the training and the qualifications and the experience. And, you know, we have to work to create that critical mass here in the province to make sure that over time the services of midwives around our province will be valued and will be utilized fully. And Mr. Speaker, I very much look forward to the day when we do have throughout all of our communities in the province access to high quality maternity care before the birthing process, during and after, from women who tend to be the midwives in our communities. When I was a little girl, you know, I can remember different times. The old party line would be, the phones would be going, there would be a woman in the community who would be going into labor, and people would be out looking for the local woman who lived somewhere along the party line, who was always the person who had been there monitoring that pregnancy, giving the advice, and then often going to the home and being with that person through the early stages of the delivery process, and sometimes doing a home birth, although this legislation does not equal home birth. This legislation very much is about integrating midwifery as a bona fide, essential, valued part of maternity care in the province of Nova Scotia into our healthcare system, and I would hope into our public healthcare system. So, Mr. Speaker, those are my thoughts on Bill 107, and I again want to say how pleased I am to have had an opportunity to say a few things on this bill. Thank you.
The honourable member for Queens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I too am so pleased to stand here and speak to Bill number 107, respecting midwifery. And as a mother of 3 children, my oldest being 27 just this past week, there was nothing that gave me more pleasure than carrying my 3 children. And if only I had at that time, 27 years ago, the opportunity to make choice as to where and with whom I would be delivering my children. And I can tell you that all 3 of my births, I had some very interesting and in some ways traumatic experiences within our clinical delivery system. And I by no way am suggesting that there is not room, and obviously we have a wonderful healthcare system, and over the many years, many women and children have had successful experiences. However, echoing the words of my colleague before me, certainly midwifery has been with us since time began, and certainly is a centuries-old healthcare practice and tradition of women assisting women in childbirth. And children were, and the birthing of children were a very big part of community. And I'm so pleased that we are moving this forward, because it actually brings community birthing and babies all together, and I think that's so important. And it's so important to see women have choice in the way they determine and their families determine what is the best practice for them. If they choose to give birth at home, surround it with family, surround it with the trusted midwife, or if they choose to use our clinical services within our current healthcare system. So again, I'm so pleased, and I too congratulate the minister for bringing this act forward. Kudos to the Midwifery Association, who have been working so hard to see their practice recognized. And this act actually gives that recognition, along with licensing those midwives as professionals. And it brings a vital complement to our primary health care system. And it certainly is welcome news for women and families all across this province. Certainly there's no question that midwives are healthcare professionals. They provide safe, effective care for women during pregnancy, during labor and delivery, and after birth. Midwives are indeed experts. They promote the health and safety of mothers and babies, providing that personalized care, which is so important. And as a woman and as a mother, I can tell you that nothing is more important than having a professional caregiver who absolutely understands and makes it a personalized experience. And I remember several times going through some of my experiences, I would think to myself, as I was looking at the male doctor and thinking, what the heck does he really know? And what does he mean he knows how I feel? It's absolutely a ridiculous kind of situation to find yourself in as a woman, and especially when you're going through that birthing experience. And the bonding, it's such an important part for a woman and her baby during pregnancy. And even prior to, thinking about child rearing, and it's just such a special experience that I think midwives bring, that very personalized sense of knowing. Regardless of whether they themselves have had children or not, there is that certain identification. And so for that, Minister, you deserve kudos for recognizing that. And as I said, midwives are indeed the experts, promoting the health and safety of mothers, providing that personalized service, and respecting the social needs and diversity of families. And that's so important too, because again, it comes with the understanding of that particular profession, that centuries-old tradition of going into communities and working with families, working with women, and absolutely being able to look at the total environment of the family, the woman and the child. Those social needs and the diversity is so important, and that's what these midwives, they have so much expertise in that field. So moving this act forward is a major step forward, ensuring that midwifery becomes a strong addition to our already existing health care teams. Therefore, I think it is truly essential that this government ensure that midwifery be accessible for all women, regardless of status of income. All women who wish to choose their own care and services when they're delivering their children, when they're going through that experience of pregnancy, when they're going through that labor and delivery. It's so important that this be accessible to all women, and especially in rural Nova Scotia, where we have seen cuts to our rural community hospitals, where most hospitals now don't offer obstetric services and delivery of children in our hospitals. And so women are having to travel great distances just to see the family obstetrician. And so it's really important that this is really accessible to all women across the province. So again, I stress that this needs to be a publicly funded system. I mean, midwives and the midwifery profession needs to be assured that they are going to be able to roll out their services in a way that they can deliver to all women and all families who make this choice. And they need to be able to work to their full scope of practice. That's going to be so important that when regulations come through, that we're looking at the full practice, full scope of practice for these midwives. These midwives will certainly provide their expertise and will be working alongside of our nurses and doctors and other health professionals in our communities. And so it's very important that this government has acted to move this forward and recognize that midwifery will bring a very strong piece to our healthcare system that has been needed for far too long. And so again, this is a good day. And certainly it will take the burden off of a lot of our current strained healthcare systems, that being in our rural communities, lacking the obstetric services close to home. Midwives, they are going to offer this province flexibility and accessible care across this province, whether it be in hospitals or whether it be in homes, and they are going to be available 24 hours a day. And I agree with the member earlier who said that this is certainly going to be a bargain for this province. Midwives are going to be delivering a service that is going to effectively save hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars in the long term in that prenatal care and that postnatal care. They are going to be recognizing difficulties that may be apparent during that prenatal period. They are going to be networking so efficiently with our other healthcare professionals and working within our community. And again, I stress that as this act moves forward, it's really important that we recognize when the implementation of regulations come forward that we do allow those midwives to be working at their full potential. A member of my community had called me last week knowing that it was possible for this act to be coming forward and was hoping very much so to have her own thoughts known. And she had a wonderful experience with a midwife about a year ago, and what she told me was really heartwarming. You know, she shared her experience with me, both her first child, who was born in hospital, and her second child, who she was fortunate enough to access a wonderful midwife. And what she told me is that in the comfort of her own home, with her family, she was able to have the most relaxing experience in terms of giving birth to her second child. It was relatively pain-free for her. It was a very serene experience for her and her family. She described for me that the months leading up to the birth, that the expertise of the midwife was second to none, that she felt totally comfortable in the hands of this midwife. She had given her total trust of her care to this midwife, and she had a most wonderful experience, and she wanted to share that with me. But also she did share with me that she wasn't able to get the full scope of services that this midwife was able to offer because of the fees were so prohibitive for her. So she really had to select when she could be, when she was able to afford to have certain parts of the services that the midwife was able to provide. And what was crucial for her was that she was able to afford to have the midwife present at the home birth. And so she stressed very importantly to me that for most women, with the fees involved currently, midwife services is really prohibited for a lot of women. So again, I stress to the minister that as we walk forward with this, that you ensure that this service, this most important service, is publicly funded and really truly becomes that good complement to the rest of our publicly delivered healthcare system. All women should have the benefit of having free choice in determining when and with whom and where and what best services suit their own needs. And it's important for all women of all economic, of the whole economic spectrum, whether it be a single mom, whether it be a mom in the low-income bracket, middle-income bracket mums and dads, high-income bracket, all women should have access to this wonderful service. Again, I look forward to seeing the minister take seriously those suggestions, and again, kudos to you for recognizing midwifery in this province, finally, in the 21st century, bringing babies, community, and birthing back together. Thank you.
Thank you. The honourable member for Pictou-East.
Mr. Speaker, it is my intention to rise in support of this bill, number 107, and to congratulate the minister without any negatives thrown in behind the congratulations, as I have done with a couple other ministers in the past. I want to, in a very forthright way, offer a support to this bill with absolutely no conditions attached. Now, the minister spoke in relationship to another bill. It was the bill in relationship to the Motor Vehicle Act and helmets, and he was talking about on the weekend, last weekend, being out with his son and having difficulty on a bicycle. Perhaps why I'm not being able to find any negatives here is because many years back I used to be the boss of his uncle, and his family shared the same driveway with the uncle, and I spent many times in his uncle's house, and I remember him when he was having difficulty on his own bicycle back in those days. So having said that, I want to say how important this is to the province of Nova Scotia, and the fact that this has been sought for 23 years. 23 years, Mr. Speaker, there have been efforts made to have this kind of recognition for midwifery. And even though this government did have 7 years to do it, it is this minister that has actually brought it forward. Now, I expect that number to grow from 16 as we develop training and licensing. And I hope the same wisdom will be used in the development of that training and licensing in the regulations as exists in the bill itself. But I don't expect the number of deliveries by midwives to increase very, very rapidly. I think it will be a gradual transition. I don't expect that the birthings will be taking place in any large number in homes. I believe that there will be much more prenatal care involved. I believe that there will be more presence at the time of delivery and the actual doing of the delivery by midwives. But I also believe that there will be more postnatal, postpartum care as a result of this. Now, Mr. Speaker, I always relate back in some way to outmigration. And rural areas, Mr. Speaker, rural areas are areas that can, in fact, take great advantage of this midwifery situation that is developing in this province. Places in my riding like Lismore, Ardennes, Kensieville, Sunny Bray, areas that are far removed from doctors, doctor services, and so on. I believe that there is a role there for midwives, a great role. But my concern in relationship to this whole situation is that with the decline of a rural population and an aging population, that unless something is fundamentally changed in rural Nova Scotia, there will not be very much business for midwives in rural areas, other than in Halifax County. If midwives are to be employed in rural Nova Scotia, we need a new vision for rural economic development, or at least we need some vision for rural economic development. Sons and daughters have to have reasons to stay. Sons and daughters, Mr. Speaker, have to have reasons to stay in our communities. If we are going to have babies in those communities, they have to be there. Mr. Speaker, I helped to provide 3 fine children years ago, children that helped to keep our schools open, that attended our universities, that attended 2 community colleges, and they have gone on to provide taxation to sustain the services in this province. Now, all 3 of them are in the greater Halifax area, which is in one way a blessing. It is much better than so many that have been lost to Alberta, Mr. Speaker. But people of my generation can't help to increase the workload of midwives. The baby boomers will no longer be contributors. And I guarantee this House that, in my case, my day is done. Mr. Speaker, we have to do something. We have to do something in relationship to our rural communities. So there will be a role for midwives in those communities. Now, I attended the delivery of our 3 children back in 1969 with Jill, and in 70 with Kent, and in 78 with Sarah, and I experienced the joy firsthand, but Mary Kay, my wife, experienced both the joy and the pain. And with these deliveries, midwives would have provided very personal service, very, very, very personal care. The doctors were good, but Mary Kay was one of many, many patients, hundreds of patients, Mr. Speaker. So I believe that the midwives, the 16 midwives that we have in Nova Scotia will increase in number and provide very, very valuable service to our communities, both urban and hopefully rural as well. Now, the minister has shown great leadership on this issue, and I would hope that the minister would also show leadership on the issue of recognition for dental hygienists in the province of Nova Scotia. They are in fact 1,600 strong, not 16, but 1,600 strong, and they still have dentists as their gatekeepers. Now, some provinces have second generation, Mr. Speaker, second generation legislation in relationship to dental hygienists and the recognition of them. And Mr. Speaker, we don't even have first generation legislation. So, Mr. Minister, please show the kind of leadership that you have done with the midwifery bill and do the same in the recognition of dental hygienists in this province. And as the member for Sackville and the member for Queens and others have mentioned, there is a need that this service has to come under the public system. It is imperative that this come under the public system like other provinces, Mr. Speaker. It is only the province of Alberta, the most right-wing province in this country, that does not cover such services. And also the richest one, as member opposite has indicated. So I believe, Mr. Speaker, that with so many other jurisdictions recognizing the service under a public system and provision of the payment of such, we are only talking at this point 16 midwives in the province. So I sincerely hope that we will, in fact, someday have a very good service, one that we can be proud of, one that is a public service, and one that reaches out to rural Nova Scotia as much as it does to urban Nova Scotia. Let's keep our people in the rural areas. Let's find new ways to repopulate some of our rural areas that are seeing so much out-migration. So I want to conclude by, again, congratulating the minister on what he has been able to do, and I also want to congratulate the Midwifery Coalition for the leadership shown by them, and that I sincerely hope that we will have leadership on other fronts, and that no segment has to ever wait again for any kind of a service for a period of 25 years. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The honourable member from Halifax-Lentic.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very glad to rise to speak to this because I suspect that, like a number of my colleagues, I've been laboring under some misconceptions about midwifery. I know. Specifically, that it's necessarily equivalent to home birth, and I'd just like to make it very clear for once and for all that the choice to use a midwife is not necessarily the same as a choice for a home birth. And I think that that's one of the things that perhaps has caused some of the resistance over time to this. Certainly, there's no doubt that as they say, a happy birth experience is very important as a health promotion, as an element of health promotion of mother and infant. But again, in congratulations, the physical facilities of the Nova Scotia hospitals today are infinitely, vastly improved and vastly much more family-centered than those which were in fact available when my two children were born in 1986 and 1989. It's a little bit of a rite of passage to say that they were born in the old Grace Maternity Hospital. But I should say that when my children were born, and I told people, friends in other parts of the country, that they had been born at a place called the Grace Maternity, they were overwhelmed. My friends said, "You've got a maternity hospital." They said, "How lovely." They said, "We don't have to give, we have to give birth amongst people who are dying and ill, and, it's a very, very unhappy situation. So I must say that in that sense, even though perhaps the maternity hospital was a little bit of a throwback, we have, at least as a province, recognized the very special role of a time of birth and a time of healthy birth, and the role that that has in life subsequently. Having said that, I think that it's important to say that really the only successful birth experience, the only successful outcome is in fact a healthy infant and a healthy mother, and I don't think anybody will ever step back from that. But we do realize at this point that there are less drastic ways to reach that goal in most cases. I really do need to pause and tell a story here. When I was born in 1958, my mother was apparently something of a curiosity. This was in Toronto, and doctors came to visit her. She was a subject of interview because they wanted to meet the woman who wanted to nurse her own child. That's how far we've come. And at this point, there is a worldwide initiative sponsored by UNICEF called Baby Friendly Hospitals. And that's a really very important piece of the health of the community. We understand now that the subsequent health of infants is much, much fostered by not having been dependent on formula. And I'm sorry to say that we have not yet in Nova Scotia reached the point where we have anything certified as a baby-friendly hospital. One of the most important elements of that certification is that the hospital does commit not to supplying low-cost or even free infant formula. And that's important because those first few hours and days of an infant's life are extraordinarily, there's a time of fleeting sensitivity that can never be recouped. And it's true that a child who doesn't nurse in initial days will have a considerably, less inclination at the very least to nurse later. And that, of course, does, as we know, tend to produce more or less of a healthy immune system. We have been very lucky in Nova Scotia, and I particularly have been very, very fortunate in my riding that there's an organization called the Single Parent Centre, which certainly doesn't work just with single parents, but which has been training volunteer labour support coaches. I think the word is doula. And the interesting part of that is that these volunteer doulas work with women during the time of pregnancy, accompany them at birth, and subsequently are available in that first sensitive and transient period of time. We know that postpartum depression is significantly decreased when, in fact, women have had what can we call a supported labor and delivery. And this is something that midwives are very specifically trained not only to be companions, but to actually avoid avoid as much as possible the extremes of intervention, which can, in fact, leave both woman and child somewhat physically and apparently emotionally traumatized. So, although it may seem silly to talk about these first few days, and the successful birth experience is, of course, the physically healthy mother and child, we need to think as well about the successful life experience. And the incidence of postpartum depression is, in fact, highly correlated with the stresses of later depression. We know this, and if you add to that the fact that postpartum depression is somewhat, the chance of it is somewhat lessened by a supported delivery, then we can say that there's a very, very important initiative in terms of mental health in our province. I should also say that there's another thing which is sometimes correlated and sometimes supported. There is certainly a great deal of folklore around giving birth and the whole story of it. And I know I was absolutely horrified before my first daughter was born to be surprised by a baby shower. And a part of the tradition was apparently to absolutely scare the life out of the woman who was about to give birth for the first time, come up with the most gory, dreadful, and terrifying stories, which obviously would scare anybody into the arms of the forceps. But that is certainly a part of that tradition. And if, in fact, we had people who were able to give a slightly more positive story than that, then we also have better chances of lower interventions. And there's another part of that tradition, which I mentioned the other day, and I'm afraid I have to mention it again, which is that midwives are very frequently, in addition to being supportive of natural feeding of infants, they're also often supportive of the non-disposable diaper alternative. And the fact of the matter is that we are generating enormous amounts of methane from landfill, from those 4 million diapers a day that go into landfill and those 10,000 disposable diapers per child. And if we could even have or take by 25% away the amount of disposable diapers going into landfill, as well as causing or believed to be implicated in some asthmatic responses, then we would also be gaining some. So to the degree that a woman is not completely exhausted and alone and left with an infant, a bottle, and a pile of disposable diapers and told to manage, then perhaps we are in fact making an investment. In making an investment in new mothers and new human beings, we are making an investment in the future. And if it takes specialists, if it takes people who are involved in the psychological aspect of that and who are well trained, and if we as a province recognize them and what they are doing for our health system now and quite possibly for our health system and our environment in the future, then I say this act deserves all of our support. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The honourable member for Hanseath.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to be able to stand and speak to this piece of legislation. I think I want to applaud the minister for going down this road. This is a good move on part of the government. I guess we've had a lot of male views on midwifery. I have to say, Mr. Speaker, the one thing I guess that seems surprising to me is how much all of us in this House would seem to know about the term, and yet we live in a society that very seldom uses the service, and I would say that because we have some level of comfort with the terminology, that certainly puts us in a place that makes it easy for us to see the benefit of this legislation. And it's hard to think of a world that actually had this service provided on a regular basis in communities my colleagues have all mentioned, either since the beginning of time or the beginning of civilization, but certainly in the very birthing of this country, midwives would have been there for the delivery of new Canadians here, and I think that I know we could think about the vignette or the commercial on television, which shows the sleigh ride in the winter, trying to get the midwife to the log cabin, and that very much was the real world of delivering children in this country. My colleague said I'm a science teacher, not a history teacher, and I was a biology teacher, and as much as I taught my students about human sexuality and the processes that resulted in the conception of human beings, I have to say that it is one of those things that has been made in the most simple biological terms. It is one of those processes that, as much as we might try to make it complex, it is, by and large, the most simple of processes, and it's always been something that has amazed me because of the simplicity of it, Mr. Speaker. I'm certainly not a midwife, and but I make several deliveries every year in my farm, and it's an area which I hope I don't have to. You know, if I deliver 10 lambs in a winter, that's really about all I would really like to do. Because that usually means there's going to be a complication, but I've been very, very fortunate. I usually only have to require a veterinarian once a winter. But through that process, I think about the seriousness, I guess, of the delivery of children or delivery of babies into this world, and how fortunate we are with all of the technology and the healthcare system and the hospitals that we have, and how lucky we are to live in this environment for those deliveries. My own children, I have 4, and you know, I have to say that you know, we all have a good idea about what's going to happen when our children are born, but certainly it is an experience, and although more painful for my wife, it is one that makes you think a lot, and worship the gift, I guess, that you've been given. And I really had to say how thankful I was for the nurses in particular, actually, at the Grace Maternity. I was surprised at the process, you know, that basically this is a process that the nurses kind of carried on that role, you know, pretty much right up to the birth of my children, and the doctors showed up, and my local family doctors, and which I was, you know, I thought was great that they were able to be there. And I was surprised, you know, and pleased, I guess. I don't know if I should say surprised, but at their dedication, I think, in one way. One of our doctors was there for the whole process, and I was a little curious as to why that was, because my previous 3 children, the doctor really showed up just at the end, and I thought, you know, it seemed odd that this doctor stayed in the room pretty much, you know, as the labor kind of progressed, and but actually to kind of find out that they knew more than I did, obviously, that my daughter's umbilical cord was around her neck, and so they were monitoring that very closely, and my doctor had stayed right there, which I was really impressed and pleased with Dr. McNeil, who did that, and with a very happy result at the end. So, Mr. Speaker, I only had one constituent, actually, who raised the issue of midwifery. This is someone who was interested in carrying this practice, and I think and I may have this wrong because she's not in my constituency anymore, but her husband and her moved, I think, to Ontario, where if it was my understanding that she got some training to practice midwifery. And this was an issue for her, that the province had no legislation in this regard. And so I'm hoping that this will open a door for her, and perhaps you know, that she may come back, and that for other women in this province. One of my siblings was delivered by a midwife in Elmsdale. And so, as much as we think that you know, that occurred in the very, very distant past, Mr. Speaker, it hasn't been, and I guess maybe that's why you know, I have some level of comfort knowing that in that case things went very well with the expertise of the woman who helped my mother, and. So this is about choice, I hope, for women, you know, who have a level of comfort with midwifery and would like to have their children delivered by midwives. And I can only see that making this birthing process as comfortable and least stressful as possible can only have positive outcomes. And so I'm pleased to see the minister bring this bill forward. I have to echo the concerns of my colleagues around how this service will be delivered or how it will be paid for, and that it would be very important that this is covered in the public system, and that this doesn't become an issue for those who can afford it and those who can't afford it. This is a service that, if it is to have the health benefits that I think the minister is after, that he recognizes the health benefits for both women and children, that on the issue of health, this will be covered by our healthcare system, so that anyone who wishes to make use of this service will. So I look forward to this bill going through the House. I'm curious and interested to see, what else happens with this legislation and the service as it is delivered in the province. So with that, thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. The Honourable, the member for Halifax-Sydney.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do want to take no more than 5 minutes, I think, to comment on this bill. I think, like most of my colleagues on this side and on the other side as well, I think this is a big step forward. It's been a long time coming. I was talking with Jan Catano yesterday, who is one of the leading members of the Midwifery Coalition, and I asked her when she first got involved in it, and she said 23 years ago. It has been a long time, and you have to commend the coalition for fighting that battle over such a long time, and certainly looking back on it now, if we can talk about where we are as past that. I think you wonder what all the fuss was about. This bill does provide a great measure of recognition and respect to a profession that has been recognized elsewhere in the world and has worked without any great difficulty. I think it's a particularly important issue in a general way, because it's largely practiced by women. It's a predominantly female profession, and we know that with these professions, like nurse practitioners and dental hygienists, they seem to have a very difficult time getting the recognition and respect they deserve, and I think this is a big step forward for this group and for women, both who practice the art, but also who will benefit from it. I also think it fills a very important gap in our healthcare system. We have a shortage of obstetricians and family doctors, particularly in rural areas, and this provides a willing and able group of experts who are able to take some of the load off doctors to practice and to make that practice more meaningful, and also to free up specialists to do other things. So it fills a gap. Thirdly, it speaks, and importantly, it speaks to the physical and emotional health-being of the mother and the child. And this provides a de-institutionalized setting, usually in the home, and it creates a much more positive experience, both for the mother and the child, and I should say the father and the rest of the family, who can be more engaged and more involved in this very important occasion. But as my colleagues have said on this side, there's still an awful lot of work to be done. It has taken 23 years and more to get to this point. But there is still a question of integration into the healthcare system. As the nurse practitioners know, the devil really is in the detail, and the devil rests on the goodwill of the professions and the institutions and their ability to integrate properly and to become really meaningful partners in this process. I think the Midwifery Coalition has benefited from the experience of the Nurse Coalition, the nurse practitioner group, but we hope that they don't have to go through the same experience, and that there will be a great deal of education around that in areas where midwives will first start to practice, because those pioneers will break a lot of ground, and it'll be very hard work for them, but we hope it's not as hard as it was for the nurse practitioners. We hope someday to see this as part of a larger philosophy of integration of other health professionals like chiropractors and dental hygienists into the process, so that we can free some of the wait times and things like that we have in the healthcare system. There is the question of funding and differential access, that this can't be something that's available only to the privileged or even those who live in urban areas. It has to be something that's generally across the board, because it's the right thing, it's a good thing, and in terms of economy, it's the cheapest way to deliver this very important service. And we have to work with the hospitals and the doctors in particular to make sure that these midwives have some privileges at hospitals and other healthcare facilities, that they're not treated as second-class citizens in this important endeavor. And the composition of the boards, the governing boards in this profession, will have to respect the importance of midwives and give midwives the majority, and have at least one midwife present for the effective making of decisions, given that this is a profession that is eventually going to be a self-regulating profession. We have to recognize the fact that they have the largest stake in this profession, and for that reason they should have the largest say in it. But in general, Mr. Speaker, I agree with what my colleagues on this side have said. It is a big step forward for the profession itself and for women and families in Nova Scotia, and I commend the government for bringing this forward, even though it's taken them a long, long time to get here. Thank you.
I'll recognize the Minister to close debate on Bill 107.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the members opposite for their interventions, I think, on this very important bill. Mr. Speaker, just to maybe speak to a few pieces of the concerns that the members did bring up during their speech, their times, the time's up. You know, we are talking about integration. We're talking about integration of a healthcare professional into a healthcare team. And as we continually try to vary the services to frontline people, to Nova Scotians, we're talking about nurse practitioners, we're talking about midwives in this case, working with the healthcare teams along with physicians. Because, Mr. Speaker, as we go along, we do need to do things differently. If you look at, you know, the member for Halifax Atlantic brought up during her time, how it has changed in her lifetime from the time she was born, and a mother, you know, kind of being a little off by breastfeeding. You know, 12 years later, you know, and I can use the story of my wife's or my mother-in-law, who, when she had my wife, of course, the doctor was going to prescribe pills to dry her up, and of course, my mother-in-law sort of asked the question, "Dry what up?" And the physician says, "Well, you know, you're not going to breastfeed, are you?" And of course she said, "Of course I am." And I mean, that's the kind of changes that we've had in just a short period of time. You know, we look at my father and, you know, many people in the community of West Pubnico, you know, were born at home. So we've gone almost full circle. And not to the point that midwifery equals home delivery, but I think what it means is that there's going to be a full range of services going a little more back to the roots and the natural aspect of birth and delivery. Mr. Speaker, I want to also thank and comment that this province, out of the 7 that have midwifery legislation, is probably one of the only, is the only province now to have had midwives at the table during the drafting of that legislation. And we'll continue to use them. They are the experts in this field, and using their expertise as we go forward in the drafting of the policies and the regulations that will go forward. I do want to thank the Midwifery Coalition for their tenacity, because they've been at this for a heck of a long time to get government to bring this piece of legislation forward. And I can say that I've got thousands of cards from the Midwifery Coalition. I don't know, there's nice little purple cards that I'm sure that many of you got. I'm sure I probably got double the amount that other members would have got. And I want to thank them for, again, their tenacity and their hard work in bringing this piece forward. I also want to thank somebody from my constituency, Renee Muse. Renee Muse is a resident of Tuscot. She originally comes from Saint-Anne-du-Ruisseau, a social worker and also a midwife. Did her training and also has traveled around the world providing that service to citizens around the world. And something tells me she was in Indonesia last, but I'm not exactly sure of the location, but she has spent some time outside of Canada perfecting the skills of midwives. I also want to make a comment, you know, the challenge that we had over the last number of months in bringing this piece forward, and I think the challenge that the department has had over the last number of years is the issue of the self-regulation. As you're creating a self-regulating body, you need to have a core group in order to self-regulate. The problem with the midwives is that there was only 16 or less at a certain point, so it was very difficult for them to self-regulate themselves. So I think we've come up with an option for them in setting up this council that does not only include midwives but other health professionals that they will interact with in the future, because as I talk about, this is about integration of another healthcare professional into our healthcare system. And Mr. Speaker, you know, finally, when we talk about the issue of funding, Mr. Speaker, we're still at a point where we don't have a program. We don't know exactly how they will be integrating into that healthcare system, and I think it'd be prudent for me as minister to make sure that we have a developed program to bring forward to Cabinet for their perusal. So, I mean, there is a fair amount of work to be done still, and I look forward to bringing that information forward and supporting this aged profession, and I'm glad that we can get back to a point to utilize them within our healthcare system here in Nova Scotia. So with those quick words, Mr. Speaker, I will move a second reading of Bill 107.
Thank you. The motion is for second reading on Bill number 107. Is the House ready for the question? Question. Would all those in favor of the motion please say aye? Aye. Those against? Motion carried.
Bill 107, entitled An Act Respecting Midwifery.
Order that this bill be referred to Committee on Law Amendments. The Deputy Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to call Bill 95, Municipal Government Act.
Bill number 95. Pardon me. The Honourable the Deputy Government House Leader.
I'd like to call Bill 113, Environmental Act.
Thank you. Public bills for second reading, Bill number 113. The Honourable the Minister of Environment and Labour.
Mr. Speaker, and I'm pleased to rise to move second reading of Bill 113, which makes significant improvements to Nova Scotia's Environment Act. It brings an already effective law up to date and adds some clarity and certainty in some key areas. But before we introduce this bill, Mr. Speaker, we wanted to find out what Nova Scotians thought about the proposed amendments. And in total, we consulted 26 individuals, governments, business organizations, and environmental groups across this province. Some examples of the groups we consulted for the information of the House include environmental organizations such as Clean Nova Scotia and the Ecology Action Centre. The Canadian Manufacturers and Exporters, Nova Scotia Power, Bowater, Mersey, Michelin, and Nina Paper were also consulted in this process. In addition, Mr. Speaker, municipalities and other organizations, including the Union of Nova Scotia Municipalities, the Halifax Regional Municipality, the Municipality of Lunenburg, to keep my colleague happy, and the Nova Scotia Federation of Agriculture were also invited to offer their comments. We've taken the time, Mr. Speaker, on this bill for a full review of the proposed amendments, and we've listened to the comments of many Nova Scotians about how best to protect our environment, including, Mr. Speaker, members of the opposition parties. Mr. Speaker, I believe the following proposed amendments reflect not only the core beliefs of this government, but also those of Nova Scotians as a whole. We are proposing more aggressive targets for waste diversion, which will lower our disposal rate to 300 kilograms per person per year by 2015. That is well below our current rate, Mr. Speaker, of 427 kilograms per person, and dramatically lower than the Canadian average of 772 kilograms per person. Mr. Speaker, during our consultations, we were told that the provisions in the Environment Act for contaminated sites had not been functioning as well as they should be. We now believe that contaminated sites can be best managed through better regulations. And so we're proposing a broad enabling framework in the legislation that allows for more proponent-driven cleanup of contaminated sites and greater certainty, Mr. Speaker, which was one of the main problems on the issue of regulatory authority in regard to contaminated sites. And consultation on this is already underway. We've also heard Nova Scotians respond positively to our proposal of a new round table on environmental sustainability. And I've already met, Mr. Speaker, with many of the stakeholders who will be asked to sit on that round table, and I'm confident that that round table will serve Nova Scotians, whatever government's in power, as it seeks to successfully address issues and initiatives that could potentially affect our economy and, more importantly, our environment. Another significant improvement will be to remove the word, and I shouldn't have used the word significant, it's not a play on words, but to remove the word significant from the word significant adverse effect. Adverse effect is defined in the Act, and there will be no change to that definition, Mr. Speaker. But the word significant could be an additional hurdle in the prosecution of some cases. There is concern in removing the word, however, that minor offences would be prosecuted, Mr. Speaker. And, Mr. Speaker, to relieve that concern, we've added a de minimis clause to the polluter pay principle. Mr. Speaker, stakeholders also said they don't want the department to change approvals without clear justification. Therefore, we're proposing a for greater certainty clause, Mr. Speaker, that will ensure that proposals can be reopened only when there's a change in standard or where there is or may be an adverse effect on the environment. Mr. Speaker, we received support for the proposed rejuvenator of the Environmental Trust Fund. And when I was at the Salt of the Earth conference in the riding of the honourable member from Queens, at that meeting, they spoke with great joy about the Environmental Trust Fund being rejuvenated. And this trust fund will permit external trustees to be involved in the management of the funds and will allow courts to direct certain monies from fines to be designated to the fund, which could then go to groups who are involved in environmental projects and helping the environment of this province of ours. Also, Mr. Speaker, we want to make sure that the public has easy access to information in the department and to decisions pertaining to property that are of interest to them. Therefore, we'll be moving aggressively in the coming months to make the environmental registry that already exists more accessible for Nova Scotians who want to know how their environment is being managed and protected. And finally, based on comments from stakeholders, we propose that the advisory committee review this act every 5 years instead of every 7 years as it currently is. So as you can see, Mr. Speaker, we've done extensive consultations with both ENGOs, environmental non-government organizations, and with businesses, and the changes that are being proposed are changes that we believe, and I believe all Nova Scotians will see as benefiting the environment. And with those few words of introduction, I look forward to the comments from the members of the other parties, and we'll listen with interest to them. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Halifax Atlantic.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very pleased to stand today to speak to the proposed amendments to the Environment Act. To start with, it seems odd that we have an Environment Act. I think for many of us, we have come to realize over the past years that environment, as slippery as a term as it is perhaps more of a lens through which we regard many of our human activities. And whether or not such and such a procedure or proposal is in fact environmentally sustainable, environmentally sensitive, is something which is a part intimately wound into almost every proposal that we have. Makes you think of the old Joni Mitchell tune. You don't know what you got till it's gone. And that perhaps is the only way that we sometimes find environment. And that's why it makes it so very important that we should have somewhere defined the nature of the lens through which we regard so many of these activities. And perhaps that's what makes the Environment Act itself such a difficult act in many ways to get a grasp on, because it is an act which sets up a number of regimes and systems for looking at activities as much as actual content. And having said that, these amendments are in fact ones which adjust processes as much as they adjust substance. Nevertheless, it's important that these processes should be kept as finely tuned as possible. And I think that the broad consultation is an indicator of just how difficult it is to decide exactly how we should regard activities with a view to their environmental impacts. The basic tenets of good government, transparency, and accountability are, of course, paramount. And in the Environmental Act and the environmental assessments, environmental amendments, I hope that we are, in fact, going to be able to maintain transparency and accountability at all times. Two of the most significant changes which are proposed here are process changes, and they concern approvals. They also concern assessments. What this set of amendments proposes to do is to introduce a streamlining process for environmental assessments in developing a system of so-called class environmental assessments. Now, we already have our Class 1 assessments and our Class 2 assessments, so I'd perhaps prefer to call this bulk assessments. What this is intended to do, as I understand it, is to set up a regime by which, by regulation admittedly, and not by coming to the House, but a regime by which certain types of activity can be screened as a group of activities. The example was given of power line installations. Perhaps one might say that the installation of a power line is relatively similar in many ways, although it will vary whether it is to cross farmland, urban areas, swamp, as the case may be. But there are certain basic features of power transmission lines which are shared. And one might look at these as the underlying elements by which a bulk environmental assessment can be justified. I do hope, however, that these class assessments, these bulk assessments, are not going to be taken as a blanket assessment approval, which will allow something as, for example, a power line to be approved without further investigation. One should, of course, continue to look at the individual circumstances of the land in which that given activity is going to take place. However, this is a form of shorthand, and to the degree that environmental assessments are can be a lengthy, complex, and often confusing process for proponents and neighbors alike, it's probably a good idea to have some form of streamlining, some kind of understanding and a registry of bulk approvals. I hope you don't mind me calling them bulk approvals, class approvals, which is available to the public. I hope as well that not too many types of activities are going to be included in this. And this is one of the places where putting into regulations the system for designating which activities are subject to group approvals could be problematic. I would like it to be very clear when a given type of activity, and publicly known, when a given type of activity is about to be approved for group or bulk assessments. So I think that would be my single caveat on this. Another element of the process which is frequently problematic and which is going to need to be carefully regarded is that surrounding environmental approvals for different activities. One of the provisions here is that if somebody is doing something which is not in compliance with what ought to be an environmental approval, a temporary approval can be issued, and that temporary approval will cover the period of non-compliance. I would say that it's extraordinarily important, however, that a condition of any temporary approval has got to be a firm deadline for compliance so that we don't have open and infinite temporary approvals. I would also suggest that non-compliance or failure to meet that deadline must not be something which is rewarded by simply initiating another temporary approval. We do have cases in which, sequentially running activities, not environmental approvals, can in fact be rewarded. Adverse possession of land would be one thing. So we don't want to make this a cumulative and infinite process. Another portion of this, of course, is that concerning the round table. And again, the process of consultation is, of course, almost the essence of environmental assessment, environmental approval, environmental activity. To the degree that the community has become the environment, we do need to rely extraordinarily heavily on consultation, and the round table is another form of shorthand, which presumably we would hope, if it's well composed, will give us some form of insight into what is in fact the general belief in the community, the larger community, the Nova Scotia community, although it may not give us all of the insight we need into the beliefs of the local community. And we need, of course, to keep an eye on that fact. I would say that putting the administration of the Environmental Trust Fund into Cabinet hands is perhaps not something that I would be in a great hurry to embrace, and I would hope that the guidelines for the administration of the Environmental Trust Fund, which can involve very, very large sums of money to the degree that the fines are imposed for environmental trespasses, that these fines should not become simply a pool of money which ends up in some form of, if not general revenue, then some unscrutinized form of assets and resources. So with that, I'd like to say that the round table is a good idea, and we're happy to have it back on deck. It had been in abeyance for some years, but that the administration of the Environmental Trust Fund should be as transparent and as accountable as possible, and that may in fact not be fully by engaging it in cabinet hands. Having said all this, these are some of the processes that the amendments deal with. And it could make it sound as though these are not important to the way life is conducted in Nova Scotia. But all around us, we do see the impact of activities which have been conducted without regard for the physical and, primarily for the physical and biological environment surrounding. We still have significant issues concerning land, air, and water in the province, and many of these are in fact historic issues. There's no question that that Nova Scotia has got some of the environmental problems that it has quite simply because it is a long, settled area, and because technology and mores have changed significantly since the province was first settled. Some of the first activities in this province were surface coal mines, which then went into larger mines and industrial level and exporting mines. And of course, these coal mines as well became the backbone of the electrical generation system in Nova Scotia. We probably wouldn't do that today. But the fact of the matter is that we are left with these. And if you go into the basement of almost any house built before about 1950, you will probably find a layer of coal clinkers and clinkers from the burning of coal in domestic use. We don't countenance that anymore. And somehow, as a province, we need to have regard to the fact that, yes, technology has improved, and our mores are changing. We need to think about jurisdictions which have been settled even longer than ours, have been using similar technology for as long or longer, and in which the pressure of population has in fact forced those jurisdictions to recognize that these are not necessarily sustainable. But often that recognition only comes once the damage is extreme. One thinks of the smog over London and the pollution in the Ruhr Valley to realize that, in fact, we can see, we don't need to experience firsthand in Nova Scotia the impacts of some of the activities that we do, in fact, conduct here. We can look, we can learn from other jurisdictions, and hopefully will look and learn before we have to experience firsthand the impacts of what has been experienced in other jurisdictions. Now, coal is only one example, of course. We have advanced fairly significantly, I think, in our view of the disposal of something which is mentioned in this Act, which is litter. Litter can be defined, as my father would define a weed, perhaps, as my father would say a weed is a flower that's anywhere you don't want it. And I think maybe litter should be seen as something the same way. It's something that's anywhere you don't want it, and it's been put there. Litter can, in fact, comprise a huge number of things. It's not just pop cans, coffee cups, sandwich bags. It's not just old tires which aren't available for recycling. It's not just oil drums. It can, in fact, be any large amount of material, I would argue, in any case. It could be any very large amount of material which has been moved and placed where it's not wanted from an environmental point of view without inspection. I have real concerns about, for instance, the mercury content of peat bog fill, which is regularly and freely moved and finds its way often very, very close to, or, one hopes not, but can find itself actually in watercourses. But certainly even that which would appear to be quite benign may be benign in its place, but when large amounts are moved, it can be problematic. So that's another way in which our mores are changing, because we do realize that major disruption is, in fact, not only chemical, but physical disruption can make a significant impact on our environment. And what this is this says it's necessary to observe. It's not always necessary to stop, but I do think that it's necessary to know what has been done. I would say it's a good idea for us to know when large quantities of material have been removed from one place, that they have in fact gone to somewhere else. If nothing else, that this is a way of tracking the sources of materials. Having said that, a lot of what the Environment Act is concerned with is in fact liability. It's not always with the biological, chemical, and physical impacts, but it's also with liability. If a given activity turns out to have been detrimental, who is responsible? And again, because we are an old and long-settled province, this can be a very, very significant problem. We have all sorts of orphan and abandoned garbage dumps, which range from nothing more than a couple of cars with their accompanying transmission fluid and oil, to many, many hectares of land yielding thousands, literally thousands of tons of material, which may in fact be contaminated. So we do need to be well aware of the fact that there are often contaminants that were placed a long, long time ago, and we don't have recourse against the people who originally may have caused that damage. We have places in this province which are the results of long and careless disposal. And I think that if people really wonder about that, you need only look at some of the places where population has been concentrated for so long that the soil is, if investigated, considered to be contaminated under literally every house and street. We have a problem there. And sometimes maybe it's best just to leave things in situ. Maybe we need to be looking at, as I've discussed with the Minister concerning dams, maybe we need to be looking not so much at perfect remediation as at mitigation of damage, as of just plain keeping things still sometimes. And if we can't keep them still, if we can't keep contaminated soil in its place, then at the very least we need to have a really good tracking system so that we know where it's gone and what is being impacted by it in its new seat. So I sincerely hope that the regulations which are going to be produced under the Environment Act concerning contaminated sites are going to be really good tracking regulations that really give us an idea. It wouldn't matter if it wasn't that we know perfectly well that these materials, if we hadn't at least established or agreed that these materials are contaminants. But whether or not one agrees that they're contaminants, having said that they'll be called contaminants, we need to be sure that we follow through with the procedure. It's not good enough to say, oh yeah, that's bad, and oh, it's gone away. That simply doesn't work. So we need to have really good tracking in place, and I think that's probably one of the biggest places that we have run into difficulties with the actual application of the Act. And I'm not kidding myself. I mean, this is potentially a labor-intensive activity. However, if one keeps good records in the first place, it's not going to be nearly so bad as having to go out and do the investigations. Not nearly so bad. And there are ways, there really are. It's having good records, having regulations which stipulate that good records shall be kept, actually does an awful lot to shortcut the needs of the investigation work, the remediation work, the court prosecutions. So I would strongly suggest that the regulations actually deal with a lot of the problems that are well understood ab initio. This has to do, of course, with, I could give you examples. I can give you large numbers of examples of places where there has been no tracking, and all we know is that there is contaminated material, the groundwater is not fit for consumption, and huge amounts of work have had to be done at enormous expense because, in fact, these have been disposal sites. Harrietsfield, the Sydney tar ponds, almost any gas station built before about 1970 will give you a very fine example of just how much work has to be done if you don't do the work in the first place. So, this is interesting in terms of waste diversion. I am very pleased to see that we are going to actually make an attempt to improve on the Canadian waste diversion average because a lot of what ends up in landfill is also problematic for our air as well as our water and our land. Methane is one of the major products of landfill, which is a significant contributor to greenhouse gases. And to that degree, of course, we can be doing our bit towards fulfilling our what are supposed to be our national requirements under the Kyoto Protocol. Looking at the Kyoto Protocol specifically, although this Act does not get in detail into this, although this Act is largely one which sets up regulatory schemes, it's an Act which actually involves the administration of money, which involves the dispensation of money for projects. And I would hope that the Environmental Trust Fund is going to be dedicated to mitigating environmental damage in the broad sense. One of the things that we know that is a huge contributor to our problem, and it's partly an effect of the old settlement patterns and, of course, the coastal settlement patterns, is that we've got a number of small and widely spread communities, and the centralization which we're undergoing in this province is to a large degree a function of a lack of public transit. When you need to, even within what is designated as a city, as an urban area, when everybody who intends to migrate to the grocery store, to the doctor, to the bookstore, when everybody who plans to make that migration needs to get into a car and spend a good 25 minutes driving, then you've got a spectacular amount of greenhouse gas emissions going on. And we should be looking at the Environmental Trust Fund as a way of at least partially financing initiatives which go towards reducing the emission of greenhouse gases. And we do know that in this province, transportation is one of the major sources of greenhouse gas. So I hope that this act will, in fact, work to foster improved efficiency in public transit. This, in its way, also has, of course, significant health care benefits. I mean, if we're really consciously working towards the improvement of air quality, we are really consciously working towards the improvement of our health status as a province. We have terrible rates of chronic respiratory diseases and asthma, and there's literally no hiding that anymore. We also are suffering from an epidemic of diabetes and obesity, and those things are largely, and I think fairly regularly, attributed to a sedentary lifestyle. I would argue that a lack of public transit also contributes to a sedentary lifestyle, because very few Metro Transit buses will deliver anybody from their front door of their home directly to the front door of the grocery store, directly to the front door of their school, or directly to the front door of their workplace. Even a little bit of concession to the demands of the communal the community and the communal transit system is, in fact, of benefit to the health status of the residents of this province. And again, this points out just how the Environment Act is almost an oxymoron. How does one make an act which will protect the environment? One can set up a process by which and through which one will establish the criteria by which one looks at human activity. But we need to really make sure that this process is, as I've said earlier, transparent and accountable and effective. We should be ensuring that, for an example, the gas stations. I was amazed a few years ago when considerable effort was put into, before the considerable effort was put into, when a gas station was closed. And within a couple of months, the municipality had issued a new permit for a brand new gas station some 500 feet away before the site of the old one had been remediated. That seems to be an extraordinarily wasteful use of our common resource. And what happened in the end of the day was that the new gas station opened and the old one was eventually remediated, and it remains abandoned. There's another one only a few hundred feet further down the road. This is perhaps particularly a problem in my riding, in which there are a number. It's an area that has always been treated as somewhere to put the undesirable activities. The undesirable activities began by being sort of the farms, the abattoirs, the less genteel activities of the city. Later on, though, as our consumption patterns changed, they came to be quite simply the garbage land, the place where you dump old cars, the place where you empty transmission fluid, the place where you bury the cans of empty, or the half-empty cans, shall we say, of paint and pesticide, because that land was not of value. And when you have enough of it, and when you don't actually understand that in fact the groundwater that flows through one piece of land ends up in the piece of land next door or downstream, further along the same aquifer, which can be very, very small indeed, but it's nevertheless significant. When you don't understand that connection, then you're less likely to actually use the lens that says we should not, in fact, leave abandoned one contaminated site and permit a similar activity to start up without remediation, without cleaning up the mess we left before. And I hope that through this Act, I sincerely hope, and I think that the amendments to this Act are being proposed in order to achieve this goal, I sincerely hope that a more flexible system of regulation does not mean a less transparent or a less accountable regime through which we regard the activities that take place in this province, but a more flexible one and a regime which can genuinely respond to the need we have in this almost insular province to take proper measures to protect our air, our land, our water, and our health. So with that, Mr. Speaker, I would like to say thank you very much, and I look forward to the next steps in this bill. Thank you.
The honourable member for Preston.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. It's with pleasure I stand to speak on this bill. And as you go through some of the changes that's been proposed by the Department of Environment, some of them look to be simply housekeeping matters, and some of them go much further than that. But there's just a few things on the act, proposed act, I'd like to talk about, and some of the things that my colleague from the NDP has brought forward are very good points. And one thing that sticks out really, really quickly when you look at the new changes in the Act is that the province says in the part of it here, province must maintain a goal of 50% solid waste diversion and establish a target for waste disposal. Now that sounds great on the surface, but that's basically where we're at today, almost where we're at today. And I would think that a little bit more aggressive approach on this would be suitable, rather than just staying with the status quo, because this Act, if it's reviewed again as it's supposed to be according to the Act within 5 years' time, I would hope that we're well above the 50% diversion rate. And you look at when you look at garbage disposal and waste cleanup, and I can think of many issues and many things in the area I represent that have been sort of neglected over the years, and have caused all kinds of problems. I can think of one area in my riding that somebody, I think the whole Halifax regional municipalities decided to dump their garbage there over time, and 2 years ago it cost, I think, $145,000 to clean this one road up. And when you drive down the road again today, there's all the garbage again. So you're going to be soon up to another $100,000 cleanup job on a road that shouldn't be anything dumped on it. And this isn't just a residential waste, it's also commercial waste. And you see some building materials and everything else. And it's become very difficult for some people in the community to get rid of some of this waste with the cost of doing it, and the cost is justified. I'm not saying that it isn't. But if a small contractor can find a place in the woods to dump some construction debris and material, instead of paying $45 or $60 or $80 a ton to get rid of it, and that is a concern. That's a very serious concern. And some of these things may be fiberglass or other things that you definitely don't want dumped on the side of the road. Not that you want anything dumped on the side of the road. So that's a serious concern. I think that probably when this bill is passed, and hopefully it will be, and maybe some modifications made to it and some amendments made to it, perhaps there'll be a requirement for anyone that hauls garbage and charges for it that they have to show proof to the person that they had or on request to the Department of Environment or any other policing agencies that indeed they did take it there, and they do have a receipt where they paid for the dump tipping fees, and indeed they can prove that they've done this. I think that would catch some of the people that do this with significant fines in place to stop these people just simply going in the woods and dumping it. We had another case in the municipality near the same area as it was a road, and there was a gentleman hired to clean up garbage from a particular apartment building. He was cleaning it up, he was charging the tipping fees that he was supposedly paying, and come to find out that he was actually dumping it by a lake, very close to a lake. And there was tons and tons and tons of this stuff that had accumulated over a couple of years. So fortunately, with the landowner, who was not at fault in this case, the landowner didn't even know this was happening, and with the municipality and with some help from the province, this problem was resolved, and the landowner has since put a gate up and stop the people going in. But it's unfortunate because people used to go to this area before the dumping started and enjoyed the lake, and indeed enjoyed some swimming and fishing and probably caught some lake trout. But these are the sort of things that really hurt our environment. And we've had in this one spot, we've had all kinds of 5-gallon cans at one time there of roofing tar that was dumped. I mean, hundreds of these things on the side of the road. So when the rain comes, definitely some of this stuff gets in the soil and causes problems long term. So when you make it difficult for people to dispose of something, which has actually been the case now, it makes it easier for them to dump it in the woods. So if you go along and find out that you can't get rid of something relatively easily, you got a problem. I'll give you another example. The Halifax Regional Municipality, which I've complained about this nonstop, has a hazardous household waste cleanup facility, one in the whole municipality, just one. So if you've got half a gallon of sour gasoline, or if you've got a jug of paint thinners that you've used to clean your paintbrushes in, and you've got to drive all the way to Bayers Lake Park, especially if you live in Ecumsecum, or if you live in some other area that's quite distant from there, you're going to think twice before you take this thing to that location. And then the question is, what happened to it? Did they burn